Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to look at ways you can leverage external data within Photoshop to generate multiple images using a common template. So before we get to that, though, I want to welcome everybody and invite you, if you have comments, if you have questions, just post them and we'll try to respond right here on the show as we go along. Also, if you'd like to join us live on air, we also have a call-in link that you can click on. It should be in the show notes as well. And if you click there, somebody from the studio will get you on air to join us. So let's get started. And I want to give sort of a little bit of background for where my thinking came for this as a show topic. One of the things that I've seen, especially at the start of summer, was that a lot of people were doing things like graduations and other types of sort of end-of-year exercises that involved lots of people. And having the ability to actually create a common template and then use data to populate that template, we thought would be an interesting time-saving workflow step. And it is something that Photoshop, which I know not everybody, but a lot of us use Photoshop as the way to generate imagery. It has a very streamlined way to do that. And so that's what we're going to do on today's show. We're going to go through the entire process, from what the template looks like to marrying the data to generating the images. And these images, there are ways you can do things using titles, but sometimes you just need images that you could put up on signage or other things, even things that you may need inside of a handout or something online. So there may be different use cases for this, sort of extend beyond the actual stream. But we thought this was an interesting topic given this time of year. So before I get into it, we have a couple of comments that have come in. So let me just say hi. We have Peter from Berlin. Peter, thank you for joining us again. Good to see you here. We also have Spatial Optic. So Spatial, always good to see you. So thank you. So what I'd like to do is let's switch over to Photoshop here, and we'll take a look at what I have set up and what I'm sort of looking to create here. So in this, I wanted to create this we're saying this is for a conference. And I have for this conference 10 different speakers that I'm going to be building these sort of slides for, with the goal that these slides would sort of go up on the side of a screen and possibly on a screen outside a room to let people know who was talking and what was going on there. And because we have multiple people, you could do this, for a few people, but when you have multiple people, having some way to automate this could make it much easier, especially if it's talking things like graduations, where you could, easily have, 100 students that you'd need to replicate something like this for. So the structure of this, we broke it into, pretty much three main sections. So we have a common background, and then we have all what I call the variables that are images. And so for that, I have two elements that we have that are images that we will be replacing through external data. And so the first is this person's image, the speaker image. And then we also have a little indicator that says, is this going to be a keynote speaker or not? So, this is a 2-day conference we're saying, so there's a keynote day 1 and keynote day 2. So we have 2 speakers that are keynote speakers. And so these are the elements that we're going to be swapping in and out graphically. For the text, though, we have a bit more over here. So here we have, we have a name, which is this piece over here, the company they are with, the title, the sort of the topic they are covering, the title of their presentation, the location, which is right here, and the date and time that this is going to be at. So this would be the type of information that you would associate with a speaker at a conference. So let's look at the data that we have that we want to populate this template with. So if I go over to, we have Visual Studio Code over here. If I switch over to that, we actually have a text file that has all the data that we want to take and place in. So the way you construct this text file for Photoshop is you actually, as your first row, you place the name that you're going to use in Photoshop to identify the object that you're going to be using to replace something in Photoshop. So we start out with the speaker image, and that's just a file in the same directory as the Photoshop file, so you don't have to do a path or anything. So we just have from 0 to 9, so 10 speakers we have here. The next is their name, and the name and all of these fields are actually separated by tabs. You can do comma separated values, you can do tab separated columns, and this is ideally something you could just generate in a spreadsheet and then save out as a CSV file or a tab separated file. So we have the name, and you can see we can have spaces and everything in here. So there's our name, there's the company name, another tab, the title of the presentation, get your head in the cloud, the location, which is main pavilion, and the date and time that this event is. And so we have that coming down for all of these speakers. So inside of Photoshop now, what we have to do is we have to say, let's identify which elements inside of Photoshop are mapped to which columns inside this text file. So inside Photoshop, if you go over here where we have the menus, there's the image menu. So I guess this was originally done for images, even though they extended it. If you go down, if you see all the way down here, we have something called variables. And variables are where you actually can start to map these two together. So we're going to go over to first to define. So in define, what we're doing is we're saying, I want to take this specific column and apply it in the text file and can apply it to this layer in the Photoshop file. So let me slide that over. I popped it over to the screen here. So what we basically have here, if you look here in the define layer, is in the define areas, we can pick all the different layers. So we have all these different layers in our Photoshop file. So we can say, which layer am I working on now? So I'll just come here. We have this done already, but we'll go through all of this. So you can say, I have the layer for name here. And what we're saying is, what I want to do is I want to replace this text with the value in the column called name. So this would be like Sid Davis was the person here. So what we're doing is we're telling now Photoshop, as you look at this, take and map this text column to this layer, text layer inside Photoshop. And we basically, right at the beginning, we go through this for all the layers, the name, the company, the title, all of these things. Again, this is just a straight linear map. Take this and map it to that. And at that point, then we have to go in and start to work with the text file. So that's really the next step. After we've gone through all this, we can do this and map it to the text file. The other thing just to keep in mind is that when you are working with images, so we have like the speaker image, it calls this a pixel replacement. And it gives you a couple of options here. So you tell it what's the name of the column that's going to have the file path that I need to get to. But then it's going to give you different ways to map that. So you can come back and say, I want to conform it, which basically says, whatever size it is, just fit it into the size of the object that I have here. And in that, but you can do a fit, you can do a fill. So, I mean, these are sort of all different modes for placing something, or you just do as is, or just stick it there full size. So in this case, we're just going to use conform because we had a chance to work on all these. But that is one of the things that you can just map to fit whatever you need. The other thing to keep in mind with all of this, because we're talking about doing this work, and I'll jump back into here in a minute. We're talking about doing all this work with mapping layers. All the things you do in Photoshop to that layer carry across and apply to this object. So in this case, where I have this image of the speaker, if I go down, and let me sort of just show you this, because it's an interesting thing. When you see it, I took this image of the speaker and I actually did transformations on it. So, I sort of moved it and tilted it slightly. I actually have a mask behind it, so it's applying the mask. So everything I do with these new objects that I'm placing in to replace it, all of the transformations, all of the grading, all of the effects that I applied in the template here will get applied to those new things. So it's not just a sort of I'm taking and plopping the same thing in. It's taking it in, processing it, and placing it in the file as a replacement element. So just keep that in mind. So let's go back to what we were doing up here with the variables. So we were over here in define. And so the next thing you can do is sort of just click next. Now that I have these variables set up, what you can do now is say, I want to map this to the file. And the way you do that is you take and you go, I want to import this file. Sorry, things are popping up on the other screen here. So I want to import this file. So you go in, you select the file. So in this case, we have speaker list. You load it. And then you just say, replace existing data sets. And you click OK. And so now what Photoshop has done is it's taken this file and basically queued it up. So now, if I want to go and see how this looks, let me sort of push this off to the side over here so you can still see it. I can actually now go and say, which data set do I want to look at? So this is data set 1. So I can now check each one of my data sets to see what each of these slides look like. And so this gives me the ability, when I do this, to go and sort of do my first scan. Does everything look okay? Do these all map? And one of the things you'll notice, so if we go back to this, you see that I have this keynote speaker icon. And if you look at the data, so I have where it says keynote, what I'm using here in doing this is a column which is called keynote, which says true or false. And what Photoshop will do is I can say, if this field is true, set visibility on, and if it's false, set it off. So now I can just go and say, I only want to have 2 speakers be keynote speakers. So that image there only shows up when that last column is true. But you're just basically getting to see everything that we have all pre-populated in the same common template and all driven out of data that we have in an external file. So that's really the first part, and if you like this and you're sort of using this as a, you say these values are all good, then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to jump and show how you can take and export those and convert them into something you could use in things like vMix or TriCaster. So with this satisfied, we could say, okay, all is good. I can go back and say, this is set. So before we get into the export, let me actually jump on and answer a few more comments here we have. So we have JP. JP, thank you for joining. Always good to see you here. We have Ryocaster and saying hello, and also noting that this is just like the vMix data setup. So yeah, it is very, very similar to exactly how you'd map data into titles. The advantage you get here is that Photoshop gives you a lot of capabilities in terms of how you work with this data, things you can do to, so you can color adjust. So say I wanted to have these slides all look like sepia tone or something like that, or with a bluish cast. I could just put an adjustment layer on top of this and all that would just happen automatically. So that's the really cool part when you can do this in something like Photoshop. The other thing, is that you could generate these things as, any type of, you could effectively go and do things that could save these out as PNGs with transparency and overlay them. So lots of flexibility for what you could do with these. So again, that's just some of the advantages you have in a full image editing application like Photoshop. So Okay, let's jump back and we're going to take a look at the next piece to this. So now, if you like the setup and things look like you're ready to go, you can go up and go to File and go to Export. And if you come down here, Export is over here. So typically, for most people, you would use Export to put out something like a PNG or a JPEG that you're going to use, and it lets you, if you do the sort of traditional export here, you can come back and say, now I'm just going to go and save this out as a file, and I can do, resolution, scaling, all the other stuff that I want to do, and that's your normal export, the way that would work. But in this case, there's another export here. So if I go back to File, go to Export, you go down to the bottom. You can say export data sets as files. So in the Photoshop language, each row inside this data file is called a data set. It's sort of a complete set of the replacement data that you want all together. So they call that data set files. And so if I say I want to export the data sets as files, you click on that. And what you can do is say, I want to select the folder that I want to place these in. So we'll go and do that. So let's see. Sort of jump around here, go in here. And let's see. So we'll call this the speaker PSD folder. So this is here. So that's the folder we're going to place all these files in. So we select that. Now you get a lot of flexibility around how you want to name these. So you can say, what do I want the base name of it to be? So I can just say, we'll call it speaker. And then, do I want an underscore, a hyphen, space, or none? So I can just turn around and say, I want nothing. And then I'm going to set, here I'm going to say, I want the data set number 0102. So this way I get sort of speaker 01, speaker 0, etc. So this gives me that setup. So I'm going to do that. And it gives you a lot of, you can keep adding different name elements to this if you need to really distinguish it. But this is stuff that you can just, you can just place here and have. And then when this is set, I've basically taken and said, now run through and export all of these elements. So you can see Photoshop is going away and doing its thing. But now let me try to go over here and I'll just see if I can open this up. Okay, so let me slide this over here. So let's go. So we have this folder here, speaker PSD. So now you can see that this put all of those files, starting speaker 01 all the way up to speaker 10 in here. And if I open any one of these, we'll just sort of open this in Photoshop, you can now see I have the rendered file for that. And so this is taking what was done in the template and generating a full rendered file with all of the layering in here, all of the effects. So you could go in and tweak any one of these individually if you wanted to. So if you had certain ones you needed to go into and do something with, you could go in and fix that up as a full Photoshop file, because it's basically replicated this single file multiple times. But with that said, if you are happy with this, the next thing you can go and do is say, what I'd like to do is actually convert all those to something like JPEG. And inside Photoshop, there's something called scripts. And one of the scripts you have in Photoshop is called Image Processor. And this will just let you do things. Let me drag it over here. So this will let you do things like convert files. So very, very useful for that. So if I wanted to convert these files and put them in another folder, I could say, okay, we don't want it in the speaker PSD folder. Let's put it in the speaker JPEG folder. So we'll select that, say okay. And then I can say, well, what do I want to do to put this file out? So for us, we want to convert it to JPEG. We are going to put it at the highest quality, which is 12. If you wanted to have these go to a certain size, so say you wanted to generate something which could be used as smaller thumbnails, you could actually do a resize to fit and put the specific resolutions that you wanted these into. You can convert the color space if you needed that for, say, you're doing something that would require sRGB. You can do that. You could also save as PSDs and save as TIFF. So lots of conversion. But for this case, we're just going to save it as JPEGs. So if we have this set up, then we can just go and click Run. Up. So I didn't point to the file. So that's my fault. So if I go back to scripts, that's always popped over there again. So let me select the folder I want. So let me make sure I'm doing this correctly. Select the images to process. Yes, I want to take these Photoshop images. That's the folder they're in. Where do I want to save? I don't want to save in the same location. We'll select the folder here. So sorry about that. That was my mistake. And we'll save it to the JPEG folder. And then I go save. Okay. And so I can say run. We're good now. So you see, it's just popping through this now and pulling up all of the different images that we have. And now it's complete. So in our folder, we'll sort of jump over there again. So now in our speakers JPEG folder, we have a folder of JPEG, and those are all the images now generated out of Photoshop. So if this were, 100 graduates on something, you would have done in that, one sort of set of operations, you would have now generated all of the files you would need for different types of things. So let's see. So that's really everything I want to cover today, but I think we have another question from Peter. He says, what about NDI output with alpha? So the way this is working, the way we did this, we're outputting this because in the scripting there's a sort of a preset thing to do JPEG. You could script to do PNGs with alpha. There is no direct NDI out, as far as I know. I mean, I would certainly investigate that. It was something I looked into. But I know there are NDI outs with things like Premiere, where you could stick them in and use them inside something like Premiere. I'd have to look that up and see if there is a way in Photoshop to do an NDI out. I'm not sure of that, but that would definitely be something interesting. You certainly could do that in something like OBS or vMix, where if you wanted to use that and said, I have these images with transparency, you could do a list and send that out with, pre-multiplied and send that out over NDI and then integrate that downstream. And that could be done sort of on a very low-end version of vMix. So, I mean, I think their basic vMix HD would work fine with that, for that. And I know that's basically what we are doing here for the comments, where they're coming in through vMix and we're sending them out and feeding them in to our switcher system to make sure that we can do those overlays. So there may be some ways. I'll look. It's a good question, Peter. So I'll look into that and see if I can find if Adobe has added anything to Photoshop for that. But that would definitely be interesting. I agree. Okay. Well, I know this was a shorter show, but I thought this is something that if it isn't something you've done, like a lot of people use Photoshop, but for many, it's sort of as needed basis. I sort of know my way around it, but there are a lot of things in Photoshop that can make our lives easier when we're doing things around graphics generation. So this was just one of them, and I wanted to share it. But so hopefully you found this something that you could potentially use in preparing for your productions. So why don't we call it a wrap for this week, and we will go into our post-show hangout, and I can answer any questions or talk a bit more about how we put any of this together or anything else you want to talk about. So thanks for joining for the main show, and we'll see you in a minute for the post-show. All right, welcome to the post show, everybody. So I was just trying to jump into the web and see if I could find out about Peter's question where he's asking about NDI output from Photoshop. So let me see if I... So, yeah, I'm not seeing it in an obvious place, but so I'd have to look a bit more and see if there's something that we could do with that. But definitely, I'll dig a little bit deeper. It wasn't an obvious quick answer for you, Peter, but hopefully, if there is something there, I'll let everyone know. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, this was a show that we put together really based on things we were seeing with end-of-year events, where there were a lot of these types of high image count productions going on. But I could see this being something that could be useful in a lot of different areas. Certainly if you're doing things that you want to generate to use inside of lists in vMix, like sort of playlist, you could do that. You could do this in news situations where if you had templated elements that you were using for over-the-shot things, you could certainly do things with that. And the fact it works dynamically means that you could use it for, signage inside stadiums or other stuff where if you have an active data file that you're reading information from for like halftime scores or other things, you could do those. I know a lot of these things could be done as well with something like GT Title Designer and Data Source Manager in vMix. But where I think you get an advantage here is the processing capabilities. Now, I'm not pretending that the images I put here are any great artistic work, but some of the things that I wanted to show in that was that you can do things like masking. You could do masks that are dynamic. So, I mean, this is another thing, is you think of these things. I can replace masks inside of here. So the layer that I had where I set up where, I mean, if you look, let me just switch back to the Photoshop screen for a second, because I can show you something where what I have here is in Photoshop, I am using for the speaker here, I'm using this as a mask behind it. So one of the things you can do in Photoshop, if you put a mask layer under an image layer, you could just go in and say, okay, if I have this, now I can take and say, I want to apply this mask now. So if I took the mask off, you just get that square but distorted thing. And when I put the mask on, you now have that. So the fact is, I could do all types of different things in here that could give you much more flexibility with the imagery. And you could, the nice thing with the way Photoshop works, I could replace elements that are having effects on other elements. So things of that sort. So definitely some really cool stuff you can do here. And I think it sort of works well side by side with the things you could do in GT Title, which can be much more convenient for very straight things I want to get out. And if you have time, you can do some very cool and creative things using it. So that was why I thought it was sort of a good side-by-side use case for the two. But that's some of the things you can do inside of Photoshop. So I'd be really interested, like, how many of you are actually using Photoshop, or are you using other things? Because I know there are some people that find the subscription for Creative Cloud a bit onerous, and that I fully understand. But so that's something if you want to share. I'm always interested in getting a sense of what our community is using, because that's really where I want to focus as we go forward. But so that was it. I mean, I think as we look forward, we have Marco just came along, says hello, Marco. Thank you for joining. Good to see you here. So that's something that as we go forward, we're always looking to sort of focus in more and more. So I will probably be putting out some quick sort of multi-select surveys of different things that people are interested in. We'll probably do that in our Facebook Streaming Alchemy group. And this would be a chance to sort of come back and give us a sense of what you're interested in, the tools you're using, and we'll sculpt the rest of the season around that. So, okay, so Spatial is saying he has Adobe from work, but he primarily uses the Affinity Serif packages. Yeah, Affinity is actually a very nice substitute for Photoshop for those people who want to do sort of a one-time payment. And it's not just Photoshop, because they have sort of basically an Illustrator style, a vector image editor, as well as the sort of bitmap image editor. So they're a good selection of things. So if you haven't looked at that, I mean, I would definitely, Spatial could probably share, more insight into how we use it. But I've played with it. I have licenses to them, so they are definitely very, very full featured and impressive. Actually, for the price that you're paying, they are an excellent choice. I also know one of my friends, Lee Love, who does photography with the Photomenta channel. He uses the Affinity set as well, and he loves it. So definitely a lot of stuff there as well. So thank you for sharing that, Spatial. So, I mean, I think that's, for a lot of people, that's the challenge, is what set of tools are you using, and how married are we to those tools? So I know, certain things like the switch you use can be much more difficult. So you're sort of focused on that. But there are a lot of other things that we use as part of our production that I definitely think, there are different alternatives to. And it's good to at least get to check them out and know them. So anything anybody wants to share with that's always good. Share them in the comments, share them in the group. Would love to know more of the cool tools you're using out there. So it could be a lot of fun. So Marco just said he's bought Resolve and now use that as a Photoshop alternative for most requirements. Yeah, I mean, Resolve, I love Resolve. I mean, that's something that we've been using here for a few years. It can do a lot more than just video editing. It has a lot of capabilities. I mean, the color controls in it, I mean, that's really where it started. DaVinci Resolve started as a color grading tool in the sort of movie professional space. So yeah, and the nice thing is you get most of that in the free version of Resolve. So definitely a great tool in the context of being a very affordable, very, very powerful and professional tool. So let's see. So Spatial says he's using Affinity to build images for broadcast and Affinity Designer for logo and SVG building. So yeah, the designer is the vector. So thank you for, I couldn't remember the distinguishing names, but the designer is the vector base editor, so the Illustrator replacement, and photo is the Photoshop replacement. So very cool. So thank you, Spatial. And JP says PowerPoint, export to PNG, major part of our productions. And it is, PowerPoint actually has a lot of capabilities around that too. So it's a good point. PowerPoint has had things like the merge capability you have in vMix, so you could move things around on screen and just say, I'm going to merge between these layers. And it did a lot of those dynamic things. So if you're trying to add some dynamic elements into sort of static imagery and text, that is a great way to do it. I think one of the things in our industry is, slides are a great way to put people to sleep if you're not careful. So having something that is more animated, even if you're covering topics that tend to be more slide driven, and that's sort of the main imagery you're using in a production, that's something that definitely has a lot of capability. And as JP points out, you can use it to export PNGs and other things. It is a very, very flexible set. So you could use it almost to do sort of layouts on screen and then export them. So great things you can do with that as well. So Marco is saying GIMP is a good free alternative too. Yep, I've used GIMP. GIMP was a little harder for me to get into. I mean, there's a lot of different people who swear by it. So I know it's a an excellent tool quality wise. But I guess and it's funny because for a lot of us, we do become very comfortable with certain tools we have, and when things are different from them, not necessarily worse, but just different, it's harder for us to adapt to that. So I think it's a good push in general to say, try out, see what you can do with some new apps, because lots of them have their own special sweet spot. And when you find that and can do great things with them, it just makes your workflows better and maybe lets you add some new things production-wise that you weren't able to do before. So Spatial was saying Affinity Publisher for book development. Yeah, I mean, I actually have the whole suite. I haven't used Publisher at all, but definitely interested in that. I mean, I think they're, especially with ebooks and other stuff for people that travel or use those things as reference, those could be really, really good. And, as much, I mean, it's funny because sometimes I'll read something and you want to do searching or other stuff, but it's like, no, I'm actually, it's not searchable. It's just sort of like a piece of paper. I'm just looking at something in a online magazine or something. It's like, okay, I can't go beyond, some of the basic things. So I think creating books, especially around documentation, that can be great. But I could see this also for things like if you needed to give handouts for a production, say it's a graduation, everybody gets a handout flyer. Those types of things that could give you a second level revenue source where, you could add that to the service you offer and get those things produced and printed. And since you have all the assets and you have the data, some of those things, again, if you're driving it template-wise, some of those things could be an excellent way to just add additional line items that people could purchase from you. So Spatial was saying there are two things missing is that it doesn't have tracing like Illustrator or things like extruding. So it's probably more like focused on a 2D. But yeah, I think there's a world of things you could do outside those though. So I agree, Spatial. I think it could be these could be excellent choices for people that are looking for different tools to use. So let's see, do we have? So Critter is another free tool. I haven't heard of Critter, so that's interesting. If you could share a little bit more about that I'm going to write that down. Krita. So okay, so that's another tool I have to look into. Oh, I love this. So JP is saying they only use PowerPoint as an image and overlay vMix data sources. So yep, those things are very, very powerful for that because the dynamic elements are then inside of vMix. But but all of these things, they can all work together. And the nice thing with PowerPoint is you can embed PowerPoint with a screen capture and then sort of use them both where I'm putting the screen capture as a background and I could use dynamics and PowerPoint alongside sort of like a text overlay in vMix and stack that and have the two of those work together. But yeah, I see exactly what you're doing for how that's set up. So let's see. So Ryocast is saying he used to work with OBS Studio. It was the best thing he ever used until he tested vMix. Do you think there's a superior alternative for vMix? So the quick answer, this is a complex question. The quick answer is no. Something that's a pure like software-based system, at that price point, where you're talking like your top-end system is $1,200 or something like that, vMix is incredible. I could see though that, vMix is a very personal type of switcher setup. So unlike something like TriCaster where you have different inputs and different constructs that anybody who comes in as a TD can just sort of immediately get. There's an interface framework for manipulating these things. That's very easy. vMix basically is I have all these inputs and each input does its own thing. I would love to see, if the folks from vMix could ever look into it, sort of finding a hybrid between the two. We were just actually talking about this morning. where it'd be really cool if I could have all the capabilities inside a vmix input with all the layering and everything you could do to sort of composite just like a full ME inside of an input in vmix, but then be able to say I want to plug these inputs into a more traditional navigation framework, with program preview rows and all the other stuff. I could see that being incredibly, incredibly powerful. Not so much that it's adding new core functionality, but that is making the use of the functionality that's already there more flexible for certain people that aren't the ones who made it themselves, where they're just like, no, I know these are the different inputs and I'm switching and using different things for that. So, but no, at that price point, at that, $1,200 price point, clearly I think vmix offers an enormous amount. And, I don't have another system I would recommend anywhere close to that price range. So let's see. So Spatial is saying that Critter, forget the name correct, Krita, yeah, Critter. So Critter is very close to GIMP, but more artistic driven. So yeah, I think they, things that are more natively accessible to people who are approaching it from a creative side rather than a technical side, can usually give you better results, not because they're technically better, but because you're able to experiment more. And I haven't seen Critter at all, so I'm not commenting on Critter specifically, but tools that tend to be more artistically focused give you more ability to express yourself creatively. And even if there are things you can't do, what you can do, you tend to be able to be more experimental and create things that you wouldn't normally do. That's one of the things I like about some of the art programs on things like an iPad, where you can be working with a pencil and still have a more paper to pencil feel, paper to brush feel, and but still create really cool imagery that's all digital. So a lot of good things with that as well. So let's see. If fan view is great for bulk editing, these are ones I don't know, so I have to keep writing these down. And the fact everything that I look at, I mean, it's funny. Anything that doesn't have alpha is automatically a limiting thing to me. So like if you can't render out something with transparency, using it in productions becomes so much more difficult. So yeah, I mean that's that's one of the biggest things for any art program. So, and you say that's for bulk editing. So very cool. Yeah, and Marco is making the point that vMix is not a subscription service, which I agree. That's a tough nut. I mean, Creative Cloud, I'm not sure exactly, but it's like over $50 a month that we end up paying for that. So it's that's $600 a year. That's a real cost to everybody, and for a lot of people, you'd have to see whether commercially it would make sense to keep that sort of subscription, or to go to something that is a one-time fee, and then you pay for upgrades as you need them. I mean, probably the biggest thing that subscriptions challenge me with is that when I create assets, if I lose those assets when I cancel the subscription, if I can't go in and do things with them, I really dislike that. So, I mean, to me, the ideal thing would be to say, you can, if you've been paying into a subscription long enough, you can keep the last version that you had and do something like that. Or if you haven't been, at least have a sort of a buyout price for that version to say, okay, now I want to take that and have that available for all the images that I already created. because I know that's really tough. And I see this across the board. I mean, if you did things in Premiere or After Effects and suddenly you don't have that subscription in place, that can be painful. So Marco was saying he likes to own software rather than to rent it. So yeah, I agree. But I mean, also, and I'll be honest, as a software producer, we do software that we charge. It's just one-time fee. It's a perpetual license. But we appreciate the challenge in saying, now that I do that, I still need to continue generating revenue, and I still need to support infrastructure and other things for the products we sell. So I appreciate some of the challenges that a lot of software developers face. So I sort of see it on both ends. But I know personally, as a consumer, I'd always go for buy over rent if I had the choice. So let's see. So vMix with Call-in-One must be best option. Yeah, I mean, if you've had a chance to play with Call-in-One, hopefully you found that useful. I think that does give you sort of a hybrid where you can have more than one guest coming in to something like vMix Call, but still have the flexibility for onboarding callers that could come into a show, or letting audience members come in and ask questions. So those types of things. So I think for some people that could be a very good mix for the two. And Marco, I know you just said you hate subscriptions, but the Call-in-One is our one subscription product, but we tried to do that at sort of like $100 a year. So we tried to keep it very focused at a affordable level, and far more affordable than if we just sold it as a one-off, a one-time purchase product. So let's see. Yeah. So Spatial is saying he's in heaven with vMix 4K. Yeah, I think the vMix 4K, in my mind, is really the sweet spot for almost everybody. It has the 4 outputs. It has full scripting control. There are just a lot of elements in that. I think you get the GT title designer, which has the dynamics, which is definitely worth it. So a lot of good stuff in there. So, and agreed. At $700, that's definitely a slam dunk. And I will say that even if you are using another production system, like I said, we use TriCaster here, and that's sort of our go-to switcher for a lot of what we do, production-wise. But I wouldn't want to be using that by itself if I could have a tool like vMix sit there to complement it, whether it's doing things like signage, putting up lower thirds, generating different sort of lists that I may feed into an input. That it just gives you so much more flexibility in the way you manage productions, where you can take a single input on your TriCaster and make it multi-dimensional. Or in fact, if you're doing like vMix 4K, you can have 4 outputs. So I could have 4 different dynamic outputs being controlled by vMix that are part of what I'm switching on my TriCaster. So almost to a certain extent what I was talking about in a little bit earlier, where I'd love to be able to combine the two. That's sort of how we do it. We use vMix externally and feed it into TriCaster for the sort of operational workflow control. So, okay, so let's see. So, Bill, good to see you here, Bill. Thank you for joining us from the UK. So, as I said, I'm always amazed that people choose to spend Friday nights with us. So, thank you very much, Bill. So, let's see. Are you familiar with SPX? It's a graphics renderer based on Caspar CG. I am not familiar enough. I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar enough I haven't used it. I haven't really looked into it. Simply a name that has come across. But that's let me sort of put these in here, since we are, because I'm thinking what might be interesting here is if I look at a lot of this stuff and put together a show with useful tools that people have to augment their productions. That may be something where, if I know a little bit more and get to play with some of these, that may be something that you guys would be interested in. So just let me know in the comments or in the Streaming Alchemy group, and we'll see what we can do. Because at least as an intro, some of these things, it would be potentially good to sort of do a high level of all of these, as I get to learn them. So Spatial saying, exactly, he renders transparencies in DaVinci Resolve and imports them into vMix. And vMix does offer subscriptions now. Yes, they do have their sort of monthly for vMix Max, which I think is $50 a month or something like that. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways for for people to leverage tools that they need. But yeah, it's funny because taking off of what Spatial mentioned there, I think for all of us now, it's much less about having a single all-in-one solution, and it's much more around having solutions that interact in a workflow that's manageable in a live space. And that's like where NDI has become the phenomenal glue. I mean, it is seamless for us to place a comment on screen here because that's coming from vMix, rendered as a pre-multiplied with alpha channel as an output. And that output is being fed out and input as a downstream key in the TriCaster. And that key is there where vMix controls whatever graphic they want to show there and handles all the comments. But it could be for a lot more things. So that becomes a seamless workflow. I have two stations where people can, you can have two people doing more challenging jobs if they each do. But from a workflow point of view, it's just a streamed pipeline. It's like plugging a camera in or anything else. So love that fact. And that's really the big thing with NDI. So JP is saying that Irfan View is free with multiple functionality. And so he says, try resizing all those picture needs to load to a gallery. Yeah, so again, definitely going to look into that, JP. Really cool. I'm excited to look at these things now that everybody's been mentioning here. So I'll definitely give feedback. And so Marco's saying he was an Adobe Creative Cloud fan until Resolve after your live stream about it a few weeks ago. Been blown away by it. I will say Resolve is one of those programs where it is so much more than any one thing you think about. It's sort of as if I took After Effects and combined it with, Premiere and a little bit of Photoshop-esque types of things I can do with fantastic color correction. And you sort of like put this in a pipeline, and then the ability to queue up and have sort of templated outputs for how I want to render everything. So it is really incredible. And I mean, this is something I don't know whether everybody's interested in. Is like Fusion and Resolve, is that something you'd like to see us do more shows on? It was sort of in our plans, but we want to make sure that, again, it's just something you guys are interested in. But yeah, I love what you can do with that. And, both with the free version as well as the paid version, which does have, a few more things in that. And the other thing, Marco, which we didn't really go into, and I know that Premiere has added some of these things, so this is not me talking down, anything in the Creative Suite, because I know a lot of people make their living with that, and they do an incredible job with it. The one thing I can say is that when you start to look at what you can do with things like Fusion, it really is like a full automated framework. I mean, dynamic lower thirds, all these other things. I am so blown away by that. And the things that you can do that are unique to the paid version are things like text extraction from clips. So if you have clips, one of the things you can do is you can actually see all the text from converts speech to text, shows that text, and then you could highlight the text and use it to edit your clips. So you could basically go and say, I want this sentence here, this paragraph here, and you can do things that are roll around that. So I think the way tools are starting to approach how we use them is also changing. Now, I know one of the things that just is available in Premiere. I don't know if it's still in sort of beta or is it actually does voice identification. So it will know if you have different speakers. So if you were shooting something that had a panel of people, you can actually get a transcript and it shows each person who said which. So it just knows them as person one, person two, but then you can go and say person one is this, person two is that, and add that in. So you start to build this metadata library about, I could tell you everything that some one person said that was on there. So a lot of really cool, interesting things going on in both the free and the paid space here. So let's see. What else do we have? So we have Marco saying Call-in-One is a bit different. I prefer that to be pay as you go. Yeah, I mean, for Call-in-One, some of these things could be it's things that if you have it there as available. That was kind of our thought in the pricing for that is we want to do something where you felt that for $100 a year, you could sort of keep it in your toolkit. And any productions that came up where you needed that capability at that price point, it's sort of like, $8 a month. It's a New York City Starbucks latte or an airport latte, something like that, in terms of cost. So, that was kind of the thinking behind it. How did we fit in that space? So, I'm glad that model works for you, Marco. I appreciate it. So let's see. JP was saying it would be great if we could integrate vMix switching with ATEM switching, and then we can switch the ATEM cameras in vMix. So there is something called Central Control. Joe DeMax put that out. That may be something where, because I know they support ATEM and vMix in fairly detailed ways, but that would give you a lot of these automation type controls where you could have a single button do things. I also believe a lot of this stuff could be done through scripting as well. So if the ATEM does have an API for controlling it. So this would be something that you could conceivably do. And I haven't really looked into this, but that's something that I could see you conceivably doing inside of vMix, where you create little scripts tied to shortcuts, and those scripts could control vMix things and ATEM things together. So I could definitely see that happening, but there are ways I believe, to make that happen. So, something to keep in mind. And you may also be able, to do it with things like Companion. I haven't really looked at the level of Companion integration with ATEM, but I know Central Control does a fantastic job with that. Okay, so we have Urban Media Showcase. He's saying data sets are like collections in website creation. Didn't know Photoshop could do this. Yeah, so I think that's a lot. For a lot of us, the thing that I've always found is that I may be familiar with the tool, but it's when somebody comes up to me and says, hey, did you know you could do this? That it's like, oh, I can do a whole new set of things now. And, I really love that. So that's something that, when everybody shares that here as well, just having that, oh, okay, now I have a whole new set of tools that I didn't know I could use. And a lot of these things are just, blending modes is another one of these things. Like I've been thinking about doing a show on different blending modes, because it's something that a lot of people see in all these applications, in vMix, in Photoshop, in DaVinci Resolve. How do you use those things to do the real production things you're doing? Because they are very powerful, but you just have to understand where their strengths are and what the real use cases are for using them. So yeah, all of these things, there are some big tools and some little tools that are there. So I'm glad that was something we were able to share with you. So Spatial is saying, can't wait to Resolve Studio 18.5 is out to production. So we can take advantage of the multi-merge and transcripting features. Yeah, I know. I mean, I have to look. I thought there was a way to export to GIFs from Resolve. I'd have to look that up again. But I mean, I can tell you, I've been using the beta, and a lot of the stuff is really solid. I mean, I would not say 100%, but the nice thing about Resolve typically is it's sort of a pre or post tool, not a live tool. So as long as you save often enough, you're typically in pretty good shape. So, all right. Yeah, and so Riotcast is saying the companion app is a good solution for vMix ATEM integration. So thanks, Riot. But there are a lot of people that actually use the two together. They, in some cases, use them side by side because they'll use the ATEM for doing things like signage, where you don't want any real latency, but they'll use it, or to bring in cameras, and they'll use it with vMix to basically create sources so that you could switch the cameras. The other thing, because ATEMs are hardware switchers, they're less likely to crash or something like that. So that would give you the ability to basically have a backup stream that you'll be coming out of your ATEM. So even if you can't do some of the fancier things you wanted to do in something like vMix, just turn around and saying, I know I can still do a basic switch. I could put up, lower thirds with an external app, and I could do switch cameras and, feed that out to a downstream CDN. So Spatial is saying, can the ATEM be controlled by the web like vMix? Yes. So it is, as far as I know, it is not something where you can sort of roll your own UI, but by and large, most of the advanced capabilities inside of the ATEM are accessed through a network-based interface. So I don't know if it's a pure web interface, but it is across a web, so it may actually just be using web protocols. It may be HTTP controls. I don't really know the underlying mechanism, but I will say maybe web is the wrong term. It is an IP-based interface that you can go to your ATEM, and that means that if you can control it over the network, you can control it with software. So that's kind of the bottom line. So that means there is a way to do it with scripting. That's how Companion would work with it. That's how Central Control would work with it. So I know it's all doable. I just haven't dug into like the actual protocol, the API interface for this, but definitely can be controlled remotely. All right, so let's see. What other comments do we have here? So we have JP is saying, let's see. Okay, so yeah, JP is just responding to Spatial. And so JP is also saying, sorry guys, can't tag on the iPhone YouTube chat, infuriating. So yeah, no, that's okay. I understand that. So yeah, but so Spatial, basically JP is saying that, you can control it, if you have the IP address on you can control it just over the network with an IP address for the ATEM switcher. So yeah, this isn't something I've used directly, but definitely interested in that because I do see it's again another one of those tools that it has a lot of price points, but at the lower end, it's certainly a great tool to have in your toolkit when the need arises. All right, so I think this was a fantastic post show. I really enjoyed this. I want to thank everybody for sharing all the different software that you guys are using to work with building assets and controlling assets in your productions. So I definitely appreciate that, and I've got some homework to do here. So, but I think this is probably a good time to wrap it up. So thank you, everybody. And we will be back next week with another show. Until that time, take care. Be well.